Welcome to Talking Away. Number one, the most important number in motorsports. Or is it? Hello there. Got to say, really looking forward to today's show because we've recently seen the number one plate revealed in both MotoGP and in World Superbike, and it's quite astounding that Pecco Bagnaia, MotoGP world champion, is the first rider, the Italian, since Casey Stoner in 2012, over a decade ago, to elect to run the number one plate. And with Alvaro Bautista alongside him on the Superbike, the Ducati Panigale V4 Superbike, the new version of that one, we've seen a number one on a bike from a single manufacturer in both of the World Championships, MotoGP and World Superbike, for the first time since my reckoning, since 1996, when it was Mick Doohan on an HRC Repsol Honda in MotoGP and Carl Fogarty on the white Honda in World Superbike. Of course, he won his second world title the year before in 95 with Ducati and switched to Honda for that single season with the prestigious number one plate in 1996. So I reckon that was the last time a single manufacturer had the number one plate on its bikes in both MotoGP and World Superbike in the same season, way back in 1996. Correct me, please, if I am wrong. But the big question is, should the number one plate, the prestigious, the iconic, the sacrosanct in many ways number one plate, be obligatory in MotoGP and World Superbike, or for that matter, many other motorsport series, or should it not? We have a star panel joining us on today's Talking Away of top racing journalists. We've got a team owner on the line, hopefully, and two world champions as well. We start with Dennis Noyes. We cross to the United States of America, a legendary motorcycle racing journalist. Those of you who listen in Spain will have heard Dennis alongside Angel Nieto in the past and others on Telecinco's MotoGP coverage. A real legend, in my opinion. And I'm expecting Dennis to have a pretty strong opinion on this one. He's on the line. It's an interesting one, Dennis. We've had, of course, Bagnaia and Bautista alongside each other. I have to say I would have been very surprised if Ducati hadn't had the opportunity, if they hadn't actually done it, to put those two alongside each other with number one plates. But simple question then, Mr. Noyes. Should the number one plate be obligatory if you are the world champion? Yes or no? And why? Hi, Dennis.
Well, hi, Greg. You're probably asking, I don't know if you're asking the wrong guy or the right guy about the number one. I'm an American, and it just never occurred to me that anyone who had the opportunity, the privilege, the permission to carry the number one would choose not to do it. In American dirt track, which is really the basis of all of our American racing other than motocross, our road racers were all flat trackers back in the glory days. And we had a system, which still is in effect, that you wear the number one when you are champion, and when you're not champion, you revert to your national number. Kenny Roberts' national number, when he first came to Europe, or his American national number when he wasn't champion, was number 80, and that's the number he wanted when he came in 1978, but his team, as he says so eloquently, screwed up and forgot to ask for the number, so I had to take any old number I could get. That was interesting because the Federation and some of the promoters were annoyed with Barry Sheene because he was carrying the number 7, and they wanted a number 1 on the racetrack and a number 1 on the program. And as a result, some of those organizers, and I don't remember exactly whether it was Finland or Sweden, but you could look it up. If you look in the old results, you'll see that Kenny Roberts, even when he was a rookie, he wasn't even a world champion. He was racing Barry Sheene, Sheene carrying the number 7, and Roberts was running the number 1, not because he asked for it, but because they gave it to him, and possibly because he was leading in points when they came in. Going back to Barry Sheene traveled to the United States, and he was a good friend of Gary Nixon. Gary Nixon was national number 9, and Barry was interested to see that that Nixon had marketed merchandise T-shirts with the number 9 on them. And when Barry went back to GB, he did the same thing, selling Barry Sheen T-shirts, Barry Sheen merchandise, which was not something that everyone did. I don't ever remember seeing a Giacomo Agostini T-shirt, but I sure did always see Giacomo Agostini running the number 1 whenever he was allowed to. So Barry, when he won the championship, had already gotten involved in this business of being number 7 with his personality connected to his number. So he just continued to run the number 7 since there was nothing in the FIM regulations that said he had to take the number 1. I remember FIM people being very annoyed. Nicolas Rodil del Valle, who was president of the federation at that time, just could not get it through his head that somebody who could carry the number 1 wouldn't do it. You'd never see Angel Nieto carry any number but 1 if he had the right to do so. There's been a lot of, some controversy about it, saying if someone doesn't wear the 1, that means they don't have confidence in themselves. Well, that's obviously not the case with Valentino Rossi, who made number 46 sort of his trademark. So really, that's the way it goes.
Dennis?
Should it be obligatory? It's a privilege. If a guy doesn't want to carry the number, there's no way that the FIM is now, in 2023, going to make a regulation like that. I'm disappointed when a rider doesn't carry the number 1, but I can certainly understand it. I'd love to see when I see Marc Marquez on the racetrack, I kind of imagine a number 1, but actually he's number 93. So really, that's about what it comes down to.
Dennis, it's interesting as well how you mentioned Gary Nixon there and Barry Sheen, and it doesn't surprise me to hear Barry Sheen doing something for commercial interest, because obviously, he always said, didn't he, you always get a bad deal on the tax, and he was very careful with his money, and apparently Barry was always first in the queue at Cadwell Park for the national races there for prize money, and his brown envelope, so I hear, was always tended to be fatter than everybody else's, so that doesn't surprise me. But Roberts then, it's interesting, so you said there was a race there when possibly Kenny Roberts ran the number 1, even though Barry Sheen was the reigning world champion. That would just never happen anymore, would it?
Well, Roberts carried the number 1 whenever he could. I think the last guy to successfully defend the championship with the number 1 was Mick Doohan. And I do remember Mick kind of talking out of the side of his mouth the first time he saw somebody show up. I think it was Danny Pedrosa showed up with the number 26 instead of the 2, although Danny had worn the 2 when he was second in the championship. But Mick sort of said out of the side of his mouth, I see these guys just carry any number they feel like. He said, I'd like to see them all carry the number top 10 they wore last year so they could all line up on the grid and I could remember where they finished.
Well, that actually reminds me of when I grew up watching touring cars at the heyday, really, for the British Touring Car Championship, the Super Touring era in the 1990s. I remember playing the computer games, the TOCA Touring Car Championship and TOCA 2, and all the cars had the number on of the position they had in the championship the year before. I remember the Honda, James Thompson's Honda, had a number 5 on for the 98 season because he'd finished 5th in the championship in 97, for example. Alain Menu in the Renault had the number 1 as he was the 97 British champion and so on. Dennis, thank you very much for that. Live on the line there from Borrego Springs, and really nice to talk to Dennis. Now, I think we should have Hodgie on the line now. BT Sport MotoGP pundit Neil Hodgson, the 2003 World Superbike champion, who, of course, was synonymous with a 3-digit number, 100. What do you reckon then, Hodgie? The simple question, really, should you be obliged to run the number 1 plate if you are the world champion?
Yeah, I think you should be obliged to run number 1. I don't know, when did it change? I don't even know when it changed. I don't know who the first person was not to run number 1. You'll know the answer to that, but you've got to run number 1, haven't you? That's the whole idea. You spend your life trying to be number 1. It's all about being number 1, so I don't see why you wouldn't. Obviously, I understand the commercial value of Valentino Rossi's number 46 and all that sort of stuff, but my God, do you think Joan Mir would, if he could turn the clock back, have pictures of him riding that Suzuki around with a big number 1 on? If I was Mir, I would, because he's not going to win the world title again, is he? And I don't mean that disrespectful to him. It's just a fact, isn't it, that you've never got that picture of you with your big number 1 on. So, yeah, I'm for All for the big number one.
Okay, fair enough. It sounds, I don't know whether you could hear what Dennis was saying before, Neil, but it sounds like Barry Sheene possibly was the first not to do it, and it's no surprise if Barry Sheene was the first, you know, a bit of a rule breaker when he had half a chance. Ironically though, Hodgie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember you ever running a number one.
I actually only put a number one on my bike on one occasion because I won the British 125cc championship in 1992, and I did a one-off appearance at the end of the year. I did a one-off race back in England in 93 with a number one on, and it felt well good. But every time I won a title, like when I won the 125cc championship, I moved to Grand Prix racing. When I won the BSB championship in 2000, I moved to World Superbikes.
Of course.
When I won the World Superbikes, I moved to MotoGP. So, and I tell you what did piss me off, whilst we're on the subject, that I couldn't run a 3-digit number in MotoGP, and they made me run number 50 instead of 100. That was crap.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense now. Obviously, you've always moved on, haven't you? So you weren't able to run the number one apart from that one-off you just mentioned there. I'd forgotten that, I have to be honest. Yeah, I remember Kyle Smith in the World Superbike paddock in World Supersport a few years ago. Had to go to 11, couldn't run his 111. We were thinking of Aaron Slight, of course, used to be 111, famously a 3-digit number on bikes, and also on the Peugeot when he did some car racing in the BTCC 2001 and 2, if you remember. Yeah, frustrating actually that you've had this number then, I guess, all through your life, all through your career, and then you're not allowed to run it. Why? Did they ever sort of tell you why? But anyway, there you go.
I actually do quite like the red plate as well for the championship leader, like they do in motocross. I'm quite a fan of that, to be honest, because I dip in and dip out of motocross, and I can just flick on a race and I can tell who's leading the championship. And yeah, with MotoGP with 3 digits, they never give me a reason. They didn't say, oh, it's because our timing system doesn't work with the 3 digits, or they just said no one's allowed 3 digits, which I thought was a shame. But anyway, I would think that, wouldn't I?
You would. Thank you, Neil.
Come on.
Thank you very much for that. Let's let him get on. Okay, from one World Superbike champion to another, my good mate James Toseland is on the line as well. Mr. T, I'm going to just let you talk here because you've been listening into your good friend Hodgie, Dennis as well before him. So yeah, same question, James. Same question. You, of course, World Superbike champion of 2004 and 2007 with Ducati and then with Tenkata Honda. Weren't able to run it, of course, in 2008. Number one, as you went off to Tech 3 in MotoGP on the satellite Yamaha and did rather well as well on the front row on your debut in Qatar. But, of course, you did run the number one on the Ducati in World Superbike the only time you had the chance in 2005. So I'll shut up, James. Over to you. What is the James Toseland verdict?
Now then, buddy, I'm contemplating whether I think it should be obligatory or not.
Okay.
First thought is kind of maybe not obligatory, but I do think it adds to the show. I think seeing the number one on the grid and around the racetrack for people that aren't that familiar with the actual racing and the format, to know who's the world's best at that time, that they can kind of they can judge of the other riders on how they're doing. And if there's obviously another number in front of him, they can go, well, he must be doing really well. He's in front of the number one, etc. It symbolises that. I think for commentators, for us guys, it's a level of interest as well of seeing the number one, that prestigious number of being crowned the world champion. I think it adds to television. Obviously, though, there's an image of obviously Valentino and Marc Marquez never running the number one. They were synonymous with their numbers 46 and 93, and they didn't want to change that. So it is there's also a financial side to it as well with branding and the individual brand of the rider. But I think it looks great on the television and on the bike, and for the interest of everybody to see the world champion with the number one on the track. I think it's an addition. So I think it's a positive thing. I think everybody would have been really excited to see the number one on Bautista's bike and Bagnaia's bike. Bautista said it was like a fresh challenge, because when you walk in the garage and see the number one, it's a challenge and an excitement to want to keep that, because it looks so good on the bike, obviously. So he's gone with that. Bagnaia wasn't really kind of synonymous with the number 63, was he? For years and years, he was a different number in Moto2 and Moto3. So he didn't really keep one number through the whole thing like Valentino did. So I wasn't surprised when he had a number one, because it just changed again, really, from different categories. So he wasn't stuck with one. Me personally, I really enjoyed having number one in 2005. I wanted the imagery myself. I knew in 19 years on, to see the photographs and to see me riding around on old videos with the number one on the bike, and as the world champion, it was a really proud thing to have kind of raced that year with that number, for memories to come in further years, as a confirmation of winning the championship in 2004. So it's psychologically, though, quite difficult for riders, because when you see a number one, there's nothing to strive for on bettering yourself from that point, and that can hinder your motivation and your desire to always improve every single day, which you do as a motorcycle racer. So seeing the number one means, there's nothing more ever to kind of achieve more of. So I think that's why some riders maybe just go with their usual number to keep the same mentality and the same approach to their racing, to always want to get the number one, but never quite having it. When the number one's on the bike, it kind of signifies that it's confirmed that you are world champion, and that psychologically, every time you walk in the garage, can be a bit of a monkey on people's back. So I get it either way, but I think it's a positive to see the number one on the track.
Yeah. Thanks, James. Intriguing stuff there, Jimbo. What you say about the psychological element of it as well, because I suppose a literal number one on your fairing at the front of the bike and on the bottom of the belly pan as well, because we often see it, don't we, on the side of the bike, which definitely helps when you're commentating, that's for sure. Of course, don't forget to listen to Eurosport's World Superbike coverage this year. James, one half of the commentary team there. But yeah, I guess a literal number one very much results in a metaphorical target on your back then, doesn't it? Because everybody's after you as though, as if they weren't already. Thanks for that, James. Let's go back to another BT man now, and Michael Laverty, 10 times a British Superbike race winner, MotoGP rider in the past as well, of course, and World Endurance, and now very much moving in successfully to so far to team management. Have we got him on the line, Michael Laverty? Yes, we have. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Greg. So I don't like it where you're obliged to run the number one, but I do think it should be something that every rider wants to do, because obviously you've earned the number one plate. So I'd much prefer to see it a desire from the rider to run the number one than an obligation. I like the number one plate out there, and I loved the 500 era when it was the done thing. If you won the championship, you wanted to show everyone you were the champion. Unfortunately, merchandising and creating a brand with your number and your logo has become so much more prevalent in the last decade or so, or longer really, since Rossi started winning and bucked the trend of running the number one. But yeah, it then turned a few superstitious that it's bad luck to run the number one. But yeah, I do think if you win it, you've earned it. You should want to display it with pride. But yeah, seen even with Johnny Garnes, my rider, first champion we've had, and he run the number one just for one race, and he crashed straight away in FP1 and concussed himself. So it was just on the bike for basically one session, and he put himself out of action for the Donington weekend at Aragon. So it made him paranoid that it's bad luck, and now he doesn't want to run it in BTC this year. So I've had to give in and let him run the 57, but I'd have much preferred to see the number one on there. So it is what it is. It's changed. The game has changed. Whereas but mandating it, I don't like forcing someone to do something against their will as such. So I'm not for mandating it.
Michael, thanks very much. I'll let you get on because I know you're driving, obviously on your hands free there, but keep your eyes on the road. Michael Laverty, thank you very much indeed. Speak to you soon. It's interesting what you said about Johnny Garness, who I was commentating on at BSB last year, stunning champion in the Honda British Talent Cup. And I know he's focusing more on the European Talent Cup this season, but also looking to retain his title with his number 57, as Michael said there, in the BTC alongside BSB. So have a look at that this season. But yeah, I remember Neil McKenzie and I had him in the commentary box with us at Donington because he had been ruled out. And funnily enough, Alvaro Bautista running the number one at Jerez testing at the end of January 2022, so just recently. First day with the number one, and he crashed, and a high-speed crash as well up at turn one at Jerez. He blamed Ana Carrasco. Ana Carrasco said it had nothing to do with her. She was on her KTM Moto3 bike testing as well, which you have to say is a little bit dangerous, isn't it, to have a Superbike and a Moto3 bike on the track at the same time? But perhaps that's a discussion for another day. But if you missed that, have a look. It was a bit of an embarrassing exchange, actually, between the two Spaniards on Twitter recently. And Ana Carrasco, in no uncertain terms, telling Alvaro Bautista not to tell fibs. But Bautista seemed pretty clear, saying Ana should be with the amateurs. And Ana Carrasco then tried to connect that up to whether that was something to do with being a female rider. I really don't think that was the case. I don't think that's what Bautista was suggesting at all, but he was blaming Ana Carrasco, saying she was coasting too slowly on the line. She said she was already out of turn one and looked back and saw him crashing. Anyway, that's by the by, but it is interesting that sort of pressure it puts on you, I think, with a number one. We started with a journalist, so let's end with a journo as well, and from one Michael to another. Michael Guy, MCN Sports editor. The floor is yours, Michael, really. You've heard all that from Dennis and Hodgie, JT and MLav. So we're going to give you the final say, because I don't really feel like we've come to a real conclusion with this. It all seems quite balanced so far and quite an equal division of opinion. What do you reckon, Michael?
I think from a purist point of view, I think the rider should absolutely decide what number they choose to run. It should be their prerogative whether they take on the number one plate or continue with the number they've probably been running for the majority of their career. However, from a show point of view, I do think that it's a good thing because it can be immediately identifiable which rider is a number one. Obviously, a lot of viewers will know who's who on track, but there's obviously an element of people who are more casual viewers who maybe want to get into the sport, and with all the bikes looking the same and all the helmet designs being so sort of intricate, you can't really identify riders from the side of a track or even sometimes on television. You have to know what you're looking for. I think it could be a good thing. Okay,
but to put this one to you, Guido, as you know, at Motorcycle News, of course, Guy in Italian. I'm not quite sure actually who first came up with that at MCN. I don't know whether it was Alison Silcox. Anyway, what about the Mick Doohan opinion that Dennis described earlier on in the show? For example, let's say the top five for ease of viewers at home or watching trackside who maybe, certainly those who don't follow the championship quite so closely, if you're watching on the telly and you happen to just put the race on and find yourself watching it somewhere. What about, let's just say, the top five from last year's championship run with their finishing position of 2022 in 2023, for example?
Why don't you extend that? Why don't you extend that to the top 10 so that anyone watching could immediately know who's the top riders in the class? Yeah. And that would also be interesting that if there were riders not with a 1 to 10 number, you'd know, and they were battling up front, you'd know that they were doing something over and above they've done previous years.
Yeah, good point.
You could also do something with rookies maybe to identify the rookies easily, because that's always quite a talking point for everyone at the start of a season. Maybe they run a 3-digit number so you can straight away see that they're a rookie. Just ideas. Obviously, countering all that, and would be a major stumbling point of changing riders' numbers each year, is the commercial point of view in terms of riders' merchandise, riders' branding. There's obviously a lot of money in that. VR46 being the optimum one of Valentino Rossi, that number was just synonymous to him. It would be a difficult one to juggle. But if the governing bodies made it mandatory, the riders would have to oblige.
Yeah, they would. I don't think Barry Sheen probably would have done. But anyway, yeah, Michael Guy, thank you very much indeed for that. So it seems though as though we don't really have a proper conclusion from anyone in our star panel there, do we? I am half joking there, of course. Some really interesting points made there. Here's just one I'll throw in. I've just been thinking about this while we've been recording the show. What about you could have a 3-digit number? This is the Gregory Haynes opinion. Random. Maybe you could think of a 3-digit number, for example, for the world champion only. So it looks very different on the TV graphics, on the billboards, wherever you're going to see the number. And you could maybe have the number 1 and oblige them to run a 3-digit number, but combine it with their usual numbers. So Marc Marquez would be 193, 146 for Rossi, or 165 for Jonathan Rea, for example. Bautista would be 119 in World Superbike this year. And maybe you could put the 1 as a red colour, for example, or a different colour to your normal number. I don't know, it might just make it look a little bit different. I don't think, really, to quote David Brent from The Office, there is no right or wrong situation here. It's just opinion, isn't it? And we've definitely got, judging by what the star panel have said, there are 5 of Dennis Noyes, Neil Hodgson, James Toseland, Michael Laverty and Michael Guy. Thank you very much again to all of you. A real variation. What do you reckon? Let us know. We're on Instagram now and Twitter as well. Search for the Talking Away with Greg Haynes podcast on there. But I'm really interested to know what you all reckon. And is this something that should actually be changed, or are we just making a bit of a mountain out of a molehill here and venturing into something that we don't need to touch, and it's perfectly okay as it already is? Let us know. I'll be very interested to hear your opinions. But for now, you've been listening to Talking Away about number 1, the most important number in motorsport. Or maybe it's not. Speak soon.